Are you a current or future physician assistant wanting to learn more about finances? Then join me on this journey to become a PA the FI way. Hi, my name is Kat, and I'm a practicing certified physician assistant who will be your host. It took me 5 years after I started practicing medicine as a PA to thoroughly dive into my personal finances after I discovered the concept of financial independence. I want to use what I have learned to help you avoid some of the financial mistakes that I have made while sharing some of the financial wins that I have had along the way. Join me as we discuss financial strategies to guide you to becoming a physician assistant on the way to financial independence. Welcome back, everyone, to the PA the FI Way podcast. I'm your host, Kat, and we have a very special returning guest to the show today. We have Dr. Jordan Grumet, who joined us way back on episode 81, where he talked about his first book, and he's here today to talk about his second book. Welcome to the show, Jordan. We're really excited to have you.
Kat, I'm so happy to be back, to be on the show again.
Yeah, and if some of the listeners aren't very familiar with your work, could you tell them a little bit about yourself?
So here's the quick story. When I was 7 years old, my father died suddenly. He was a doctor, and I believed that if I could just do what he did, if I could walk in his footsteps, I would somehow cosmically fix this thing that happened to me. And so I started the process of identifying as a doctor. It was my main purpose in middle school, high school, college. I eventually went to medical school. I became the doctor I always dreamed of being, and over the years burned out. Realized that it didn't fit me. I didn't feel like I was helping the people I thought I would be helping. On a fortuitous day in 2014, Jim Daly, the White Coat Investor, sent me his book, The White Coat Investor, to review for my medical blog because I was writing about medicine at the time. And I read it and realized that I was probably already financially independent. In other words, I had enough money not to work anymore, which should have caused me to be elated and excited because I was so burnt out. And it was exactly what I was trying to do, which was make enough money so I didn't have to work anymore, but instead got anxious because I realized that that was the only identity and purpose I had ever known. And that started a process of years in which I pulled away from medicine, only really kept the things that were most important to me in medicine. In this case, it was practicing hospice medicine, which I would do even if I wasn't being paid for it, and use my free time to explore other parts of me. I delved deeper into blogging, especially about personal finance, eventually podcasting. That led to me asking this essential question on my podcast to all these entrepreneurs, financial independence people who really being successful with money. And a lot of the questions really centered around what now, what does enough look like, and what is kind of your why for making all this money. And I wasn't getting the answers I was searching for. And strangely enough, the place I was getting them from was my hospice patients. My hospice patients would be talking about the things they regretted and how they wished they had lived their lives. I brought those conversations to my financial podcast and blog. It eventually became a book called Taking Stock. But while marketing Taking Stock, I was making the point that we should really put purpose before our finances, that we should build a financial framework around purpose. And I got a lot of pushback from that. A lot of people saying, I can't seem to find my purpose. It's making me anxious. Please stop telling me to find purpose. And that actually turned into my second book, The Purpose Code, which is resolving what I call the purpose paradox. How is it that we know that purpose is really good for us, but it also is very anxiety provoking?
Yeah, lots of things to unpack there. Thank you for sharing your story and sharing your background. If the listeners haven't checked out your podcast yet, it's called Earn and Invest. It's a really great podcast as well. And you mentioned a little bit about purpose anxiety with that. And I found that concept as well as this achievement treadmill concept very interesting too in your book. Do you mind sharing a little bit about those concepts?
Sure. So let's first talk about purpose anxiety. So when I did the dive down the rabbit hole, trying to figure out why people were angry at my message about putting purpose first, I found two contradictory things, two contradictory types of studies. First and foremost, there are great studies that show that having a sense of purpose in life leads to health, longevity, and happiness. It is well proven. There are tons and tons of studies that show this. On the other hand, I found a bunch of other studies that showed that up to 91% of people, at least at some point in their life, have this thing called purpose anxiety, where purpose causes them to be anxious, depressed, and feel deflated and defeated. And so that was a big part of what I was trying to figure out is how can there be this paradox? How can purpose be both the most important thing and yet be incredibly anxiety causing? I came to the conclusion from this deep dive, from writing a book about money and life, from coaching and podcasting and working as a hospice doctor, taking all that experience together, I really came to the conclusion that we get purpose wrong, that probably purpose is two things and not one, and that one of those things is associated with anxiety and the other is probably associated with health, longevity, and happiness. In the book, I talk about big P purpose, which I think is kind of the bad type of purpose, and little p purpose, which I think is the more nourishing version. You mentioned the achievement treadmill, which is something that I've struggled with quite a bit. This idea that we are very achievement oriented people and we feel that if we just hit this achievement, we'll be happy. So we work really hard towards it. In fact, those achievements become what I call the big P purpose, the big audacious goals. And we go towards those achievements. And one of two things happens. One is we never get there. And so we're just kind of disappointed because we didn't have agency. We weren't the right person at the right time, doing the right things with the right amount of luck and genetics. That happens all the time. Or we get to that achievement, instead of being filled up and happy, a lot of times we're happy for a moment or two. And then we don't know what to do with ourselves because we've been concentrating on this goal for so long that we decide to double down. And we're like, okay, I made that achievement and I thought it was going to make me happy and it didn't. And so what am I going to do now? Well, I'm going to double down and go for a bigger, better achievement. And so what that does is it creates these series of goals that we think are going to make us happy. But often we don't even enjoy the process of doing the things we have to do to reach those goals. And so we're spending a lot of time being unhappy for those brief moments where we're happy, where we reach the goal. And so that kind of causes this achievement treadmill. And our happiness, it's hedonic adaptation. We generally increase in happiness when we hit that goal, but generally over days, weeks, and months, we fall back down to our baseline happiness. And that's very much what happens with what I call big P purpose. Big P purpose is very goal oriented. It's not process oriented, it's goal oriented. It's very hard to achieve often. A lot of times we fail, which just makes us feel disappointed. And it's very scarcity mindset oriented. It's either win or lose. Often when we win at a goal, someone else loses. So let's say your goal is to be president. We know there's a presidential election coming. There can only be one president. So only one person can win and everyone else loses. And so it's kind of winner take all. And I think when we set our life and our happiness to these types of big P purpose, these huge achievements, we generally find ourselves unhappy. The other side is little p purpose, which is not goal oriented at all, but process oriented. So this is the idea of loving what we do and we like the process of it, regardless of what comes of it. As opposed to being scarcity mindset oriented, it's very abundant because we all know there are a million things we could enjoy the process of doing if we took away some of those bigger goals from the activities. And so instead of being all or nothing, it's more all or all. It's very difficult to fail. And I think that type of purpose actually leads us to much more happiness.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Many of us in medicine can fall trap to being on that achievement treadmill. Many of us are leaning towards that type A side of things. So it's very common that people try to achieve the next thing or have these big P purpose goals, like you mentioned, and ultimately either don't reach them or feel like they're super hard to attain, spend lots of time, or you finally do achieve them and you're disappointed once you get there.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to recognize here that society pushes us towards big P type goals, right? And so if you look at social media, which is full of influencers who are trying to sell you something, they're going to tell you that you need six-pack abs, you need the seven-figure entrepreneurial business, you need to travel the world, you need to wear the nicest clothes. And the same thing is echoed in all of our marketing. So if you're watching TV or watching commercials, they're trying to sell you something. So they're trying to sell you on a lifestyle, which if you just buy their product, you'll be able to attain that. But it goes deeper than that. Our family and friends also push us in those directions. How many of us were pushed to go into medical care because our family told us that was what we were supposed to do? Maybe we had other joys and excitements as a kid, and someone kind of said, yeah, that's a fine hobby when you're a child, but as an adult, you need to be a doctor, a lawyer, a CPA, or an engineer. And so we see that a lot of society is pushing us towards these big P goals. And last but not least, a lot of times the reason why we're going after such big goals is because most of us suffer from a crisis of enoughness. Most of us on the inside don't feel enough, and we feel like we can purpose our way to enough. What that means is if we just make really big goals and we achieve them, we'll finally feel like we're enough as a person. And it's interesting because I go back and I look at my own experience. I didn't feel like I was enough because my dad died. And so no matter becoming a doctor didn't fill that emptiness. Being even a good doctor, saving people's lives didn't do that. Really, to deal with that sense of not being enough, I had to step away from purpose and actually explore meaning, which is a very different thing. Meaning is about the past and it's about our thoughts and it's the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. I had to really go back to a sense of meaning to feel enough so that I could move into the present and future and not feel so pressured to achieve these huge things, because I didn't have to prove I was enough anymore. So I didn't have to be a doctor to prove that I was good enough or I was lovable enough because my father died. I could just start doing things in the present and the future, which is purpose is all about action in the present and future. I could just start doing things in the present and the future that filled me up. And so it wasn't painful and it wasn't anxiety provoking. And I think a lot of people who get stuck in the achievement treadmill and who get stuck with big P purposes, they're really trying to prove their own sense of enoughness, and purpose just doesn't do that.
Thank you for defining meaning versus purpose. I think that's a really important point to differentiate so that people understand the two meanings there. And let's go back a little bit towards how many people who practice in medicine, they've been drilled into their mind that this is a great career. This is the goal to aim for. And again, you achieve this goal and we look around and healthcare isn't what we imagined. Providing medical care is way different than what we had pictured. What do you think can give people the courage to look into other things outside of medicine to either have as a career or to find purpose outside of medicine versus feeling this pressure and feeling stuck for potentially several decades of their life?
So the stuck question, and there's a long answer to this, but let me see if I can make it simple. Here's what I think winning the game is. When I say winning the game, it's like living your best, most contented life. We have a set period of time on this earth. From the day we're born to the day we die, it is a set amount of time. We don't know how much it's going to be, but we have very little control over that time. It passes no matter what we do. So we can't buy it, we can't sell it, we can't trade it. Time just passes. The only thing we have some control over is how we fill these different time slots in our life. So we can call them hours or days or years, whatever you want to call them. But the point is, what are the activities you're engaged in during those time slots? It's the only thing you have control over. And so what is winning the game? Winning the game is filling those slots with as many purposeful things that are intentional and fill you up, whereas getting rid of as many things that you loathe. And that's it. Fill it up with good stuff, get rid of bad stuff. And so what do we do when we find ourselves in a job, whether it be being a doctor or something else, that it isn't filling us up, we're feeling burned out, we're in the wrong place? Well, here's where agency comes in. We change our lives, in my belief, through what I call the tools and the levers, right? The tools are things like money, and money is an incredibly strong tool. So you could do what I did, which is I made a lot of money and I used that money as a tool to pay for my life so I could step away from being a doctor and start filling those time slots with things that were better for me, like writing and podcasting, et cetera. So a lot of people say, yeah, but you're privileged. You had the money. Not everyone is in that situation. Well, what I remind people is that money is only one tool, but we actually have a plethora of tools available. So you have your youth, you have your energy, you have your passions, your community, your friendships, your skills. I mean, there's so many things that we have that are also tools. So a young person might not have money, but they might have extra time and energy. So maybe on the weekend, they can start building purpose into their life, even if they're stuck into a 9 to 5 that they don't like. So using those tools, realizing that money isn't the only tool. Now, the next piece is the levers. So the tools are the skills, the assets we have. The levers are our ability to bring about change. So what are the levers? Well, there's the joy of addition, right? So you can add in a purposeful activity, even if you hate what you're doing. So if you're a doctor and you hate being a doctor, but you happen to have a few extra hours on Sunday to do something you love, like writing or bicycling or becoming part of a community, something that feels purposeful to you. So you've added in purposeful activity, even if you haven't gotten rid of what you don't like. So remember, the calculus is you have these time slots, you're adding in purposeful activity to a time slot that otherwise was empty. That's one lever. Another lever is the art of subtraction. So maybe you don't really like your job, but you have enough leeway, and maybe you don't have enough tool of money, but you have enough leeway to subtract some things you don't like about your job. So if you're a doctor and you do inpatient and outpatient medicine and you do pre-ops and you decide, I love doing pre-ops and I hate inpatient medicine, maybe you can negotiate with your employer to do more pre-ops and more outpatient medicine and do less inpatient medicine. So what you're doing is you're subtracting out something you loathe. Again, we're getting back to that calculus: addition, subtraction. And last but not least, if everything else fails, you have substitution. Maybe you hate your job and you go work for a different employer doing the same thing, but it's a better employer. Maybe you stay with the same employer, but work for a different boss. Maybe you stay in the same employer with the same boss, but you play a different role. This is substitution. And what we're doing is we're using all these tools and all these levers to pretty much change that calculus and make our lives better. So if you are stuck in a job, can you add some purposeful activity even if you can't change that job? Can you then subtract out some things you don't like about that job and make it better? Can you use the tool of money, maybe like I did, to free yourself, or maybe use a different tool? Like if I live close to my parents and I'm renting an apartment, I could go live with my parents and decrease my monthly bills, which means I would have to make a little bit less in my job, which maybe means taking an extra day off during the week. Maybe I want to go live in a different state or work in a different country where the cost of living is lower, but I can still maintain my salary. All of these are different tools and levers. We just have to be aware of them so we can use them to build that better life.
Absolutely wonderful advice there. Many layers to think about for sure. One thing that I have come across with the PAs that try to help with reaching financial independence and getting their finances under control, those types of things, they talk about how they don't know what they want. So many people feel not only that they're stuck, but they don't know what they actually want. They don't know what to add for that mathematical problem, or they also don't know what to subtract because they don't even know what they do like in their job. So what are some tools or strategies or mindfulness practices or techniques that you would suggest to help people actually take the time to analyze their situation instead of feeling like they're on that hedonic treadmill, so busy in life, working full time, feeling burnt out? Maybe they have a family and they feel like they have no time to figure out what they truly want.
So this is the old how do I find my purpose question. And I'd like to begin by saying, remember what we said about the difference between meaning and purpose. Meaning is about thoughts, but purpose is about action. So when you say, how do I find my purpose? First thing I would say is, well, you don't find your purpose, you build your purpose. So it's very action oriented. But it is true, you have to have some inklings of things that excite you, some beckonings, some things that I call purpose anchors. So we identify purpose anchors, things that are important to us, and then we build a life of purpose around them. So I think what you're asking is, well, how do I find my purpose anchors? And so there's some really good ways to do this. Even before I tell you any of those, I would say that most people deep down inside actually know what turns them on, what they like, what excites them. But a lot of times they're really afraid to admit it. And so most people, when they're about to fall asleep at night and they dream their best dream of what life could look like, it's filled with these things that are ultra important to them. So a lot of people, I think, really do know when they sit down and think about it. They've just never been given permission or are afraid of failure or fear about dealing with those things that are very important with them. So they put it off. But if you're really at this point where you're like, I don't know what my purpose anchors are, there are a few really good ways to look at this, which I go through in the book and I give some exercises, but let me list off a few for you. So I'm a hospice doctor. And with our hospice patients, we do what's called the life review. So when we get their pain, nausea controlled, and we're in the setting they want to die in, and we are making them comfortable, we eventually sit down with people and we go through a series of questions that help them look at their life and come to terms with all that's happened to them. We ask them about their biggest moments, their biggest defeats, their biggest accomplishments, the people that were most important to them, their regrets. We ask them a series of questions. It's called a life review. And if I was to make that into one sentence, I would say, if you were to find out that you were going to die next week, what would you regret never having the energy, courage, or time to do? It's like a one sentence life review. And in the dying, it's really hard because they don't have agency to change things because they're dying. They don't have energy or time or resources. So it's very disappointing sometimes to think about regrets. But here's the beautiful thing in the young and healthy: regret is just another name for purpose, or specifically a purpose anchor. So if you are young and you know there are things in your life you regret, let's turn that into a purpose anchor and then build purposeful activities around it. So Regret is a really good way to think about this through the life review. A second really good way to start thinking about this again is the art of subtraction. Look at your job. What do you like about your job? Most people, no matter how much they hate their job, they can say, yeah, but I love Thursday mornings because we do inventory and I have everything ready and I feel so organized. And it's the only time at work I feel good. It's the only morning I like going into the office. Well, that is a purpose anchor. That's an inkling that there's something there you like. And can we create some purpose around it? That's the second. Another technique is to think about the joys of childhood. Go back to your childhood room. What were the posters on the wall? What were the awards you won? What were the drawings? Often kids find purpose easy because society yet hasn't told them what they have to do or should do, or they're not worried about what they need to do for a living. So kids go to purpose joyfully and they don't stress about it. So what did you love as a kid? I can't tell you how many people can imagine their childhood room and they're like, oh yeah, I loved baseball cards, I loved horses, I loved sports, I loved sports cars. Whatever it was that you dreamed about as a kid, that can be a purpose anchor. And last but not least, another easy one, a fourth technique to use if everything else is failing, is to use the spaghetti method, which means throw a bunch of stuff up against the wall and see what sticks. It means volunteering for things you don't normally do, hanging out with people you don't normally hang out with, doing things that maybe cause you to feel a little anxious inside because they're new and scary. Do these things. And if you enjoy the process, if it's a day well spent when you do them, maybe explore that further. That could be a purpose anchor. So I think those are 4 good ways to start thinking about your purpose anchors so you can then do purpose, which is action and present future, build a life of purpose around those things. And the last caveat I'd say is a lot of people make purpose seem like it's this huge, important thing. And either I get it right and live a good life, or I get it wrong and everything's lost. Purpose doesn't have to be all that. Purpose can be something you do for a week. It can be something you do for a month. It can change the world, but it certainly doesn't have to. It can be something you just do for yourself. You can have one purpose, or I think right now I'm juggling 4 or 5, and it can change. And so we really have to lower the stakes here on people to realize it's just things you like doing that fill you up.
I really like giving people the permission and space to remind them that it can change over time, because so many people feel this giant pressure. They need to solidify their exact answer, this big P purpose thing for their life. And then again, that's very anxiety provoking. So I absolutely love that you give people permission to change, because you likely are not the same person you were 5 to 10 years ago.
For sure. And that's fine.
And then I also really like how you are encouraging action with purpose, because so many people, again, feel stuck and they get into the cycle of analysis paralysis and they just start overthinking, feeling overwhelmed, and they don't do anything to decide if it is something that fills them up and if it is part of their purpose in life. So thank you for sharing that too.
Yeah, I think it's a very important concept. And I say it over and over again, so you hear me say it even again. Meaning is about the past and it's about thoughts. Purpose is about the present and future, and it's about action. And if you keep that in mind, it makes it a lot easier.
For sure. And since this is a financial independence podcast, I would love to hear your perspective, Jordan, about how financial independence can correlate or intertwine with purpose, both when you're pursuing financial independence, but then eventually once you ultimately reach it.
I think we make the key mistake of thinking financial independence comes first. And then once we get there, we can start living these lives of purpose, identity, and connections. I talk about this a lot in my first book, Taking Stock, about the pathway of the 3 brothers. And so what I say is basically, if you know your sense of purpose, identity, connections, then you can build a life around that and figure out what your path to financial independence looks like. And it can look different for each person. So the 3 archetypes I talk about in the parable of the 3 brothers is the eldest brother, who basically grinds it out, tries to run down that path as fast as possible, to get there as fast as possible. They skip sleep, they skip food just to get to the end so they can enjoy the freedom. And they do. They march down that path really fast. The middle brother loves the idea of marching down that path fast like the eldest brother, but they don't have the stamina or the strength. And so they'll go quite a bit, and then they'll take a flight of fancy, they'll take a break, they'll go enjoy a road off the beaten path. And then when they get their energy back, they'll come back and grind it out again. And then lastly, there's the youngest brother who loves the path, takes their time, meanders through it slowly. It takes them forever to get to the end, right? So the eldest brother got there and had the most freedom, but was a little tired because he ran so hard. The middle brother that gets there a little later has a little bit less freedom, but at least has a little more energy because basically he was taking breaks. The youngest brother gets there way at the end, but then he does something that neither of the other brothers understands. He turns around and walks back the way he came. And so what does this parable mean? Well, they're different paths to financial independence. You could be the eldest brother, which is like the typical financial independence retire early pathway, which is grind it out, put purpose, identity, and connections aside, make as much money as you can till you get to some net worth, and then start living the life you want to. Or you can be like the middle brother who's like, I don't have the stamina for that. I'm going to work really hard for a year or two, build up some passive income and side hustles. And once those are covering my monthly needs, right? We're not talking about a huge net worth to cover us forever, but just enough passive income and side hustles to cover your monthly needs. You then can really explore purpose, identity, connections much earlier. And then last but not least is the youngest brother, it's a passion play. It's like if you find something to do for a living that does give you a sense of purpose, identity, connections, and you love it, and that pays your monthly bills, then you're kind of financially independent right away. And so this is how I see purpose intertwine with our finances. And so when you do that, you stop really seeing a difference between pre-retirement and post-retirement. Because if you're building that life of purpose during your work life, whether you get to the end of work or not doesn't really matter. You know, you might be doing work and you might get to financial independence, but that work feels purposeful. So you're going to continue doing it past retirement. Versus maybe you don't love your job, but you're building this life of purpose around it. And you're doing things on the weekends and you're doing all sorts of purposeful stuff when you're not at work. And then when you get to that mathematical number, of course, you're going to stop because you want to spend more time doing purposeful things. So it depends on who you are, and we're all individual. But the key is to be intentional about thinking about purpose first and then building that financial life.
Great advice. And it's important that people think about which path they want to take and be diligent and intentional on the way to financial independence too. So thank you for that.
Yeah, we want you to enjoy your life now as well as in the future. Like, I don't want you to have to wait till you retire to be happy or wait till you hit financial independence to be happy. Because God knows, my dad died at 40. Like, a lot of people won't hit financial independence by 40. So if you're like my dad, you might miss out on all the fun.
Yeah, for sure. And then my dad was in his early 60s, my husband's dad in his early to mid 50s. And yes, exactly. You never know if you'll actually make it to traditional retirement age. So you need to make sure that someday is today and that you are being intentional now, no matter how old you are. All right, Jordan. Well, I really appreciate you taking all the time today. And I want to say that a couple weeks ago, I saw you speak at the Bogleheads conference locally here in Minneapolis, and your presentation was really impactful and great. But I'm curious, do you have any upcoming presentations that you do at other conferences, or where can the listeners find you, connect with you, find the purpose code to read, all those things?
So the easiest way to keep up with me is go to jordangrumet.com. That's JORDANGRUMET.com. There you can see how to buy both of my books, as well as find links to all the places I create content. I do a financial podcast called Earn and Invest. There's a medical blog there. I have the Purpose Code Substack, which is also connected. All of it you can find at jordangrumet.com. I will be doing a bunch of appearances and speeches over the next 6 months. Coming up, I'm going to FinCon next week. That is kind of mid to late October. In December, I will be going to Washington, D.C. to be on The Table with Anthony O'Neill, is a pretty popular YouTube channel. And then December 12th, I'll be in New York City with Paula Pant doing Afford Anything, and we're going to do a group Earn and Invest, Afford Anything, Stacking Benjamins get-together, meetup in New York City on December 12th. There will be details of that coming up. And last but not least, I will be keynoting the White Coat Investor Conference, which will be in the end of February in San Antonio. So I'll be there, as well as I'm sure multiple other places. So I hope to see everybody there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. And thank you for all the work that you're doing to help not only medical professionals, but others in the world with trying to find their sense of purpose.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in, and I hope that you decide to continue to join me along this journey of becoming a PA the FI way. Please take a moment to press the subscribe button on the platform that you are listening to this on, but more importantly, consider sharing with another current or future PA that could benefit from the information that we reviewed in this episode. Take care and have a great rest of your day. Until next time.